Welcome to Who Wrote That Up for You, a daily podcast that shines a light on the American justice system and its role in empowering the powerful to take from you. The justice system is the only branch of your government where an individual, rather than the collective, can make the system act for you. It puts power in the individual's hands, but it's broken and being used against you at a time when you need it most.
And welcome to Who Wrote That Up for You. I'm Sonia Ebron, a co-founder at Courtroom 5.
And I'm Deborah Sloan, the other co-founder at Courtroom 5.
We've got a wonderful show lined up for you today. In a few moments, we'll speak with Tahmina Watson. She is the owner and founder of Watson Immigration Law Services, operating out of Seattle and New York. Before we get there, Deborah, though, what is on your mind today?
Well, I'm looking at this trial of criminal trial for a rapper Young Thug, and it's there's a basic a basic rights thing regarding the evidence in that trial. A bunch of black rappers had their like Young Thug is being subject to now, had their lyrics used against them by prosecutors as evidence of criminal activity. And there's a group of rappers who feel that their artistic works, like hip hop, basically, and rap, are being weaponized against them in criminal trials, and where other music and other artistic creations aren't. And so they're saying that this Lamar is his name, Jeffrey Lamar Williams, Young Thug, is being accused of violating Georgia's RICO, Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, and by engaging in gang activity. And as proof of that, as evidence of that, they're using basically rap lyrics. And so the hip hop community is saying that they should not be allowed to do that. And for me, I agree with that, because there's evidence and then there's evidence. And if they're allowed to use this type of artistic creation against them as evidence of criminal activity, just because it's this type of artistic talent, then I think it's a due process issue, because other artistic talent is used against someone primarily in a RICO case. So that's my opinion on it.
It's fascinating. That is fascinating. I had heard briefly about that, but I hadn't delved into it. I didn't know that was happening. It is definitely a concern. You would really want to be very careful about what you produce in terms of art if it can be used against you in this sort of way. So that is ought to be a First
Mm,
Amendment issue there
yeah.
involved. I'm agreeing with you there, but
Okay.
yeah, it is. It's very difficult. So I hope he has some success there. It seems to be one of those things that would go up to a higher court if he finds himself convicted. So yeah, good,
Yeah, with
important to bring that
RICO, I
up.
mean, with a RICO, there's a lot of stuff that you have to imply sometimes,
Hmm.
and a lot of that is coming from the rap
His
music.
music. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. You have to have you have to have some conspirators. Yeah, that
yeah,
is
yeah.
tough. That is tough. Well, I wish him luck there. Hope he's not guilty. In fact, so
Yeah.
well, thank you for that. Fantastic. At Courtroom 5, we believe the courts belong to the people, in particular to the people who use them. And we, the people, are coming to claim our courts. And so if you are in court without a lawyer, or you need to sue someone and can't find a lawyer to represent you, get yourself over to courtroom5.com. Try a limited version of our services for free, and we hope to provide some relief for you there. At this time, it's my pleasure to welcome onto the show Tahmina Watson. of Watson Immigration Law Services in Seattle. Tahmina, thank you for joining us on Who Wrote That Up for You.
Thank you so much, Sonia and Deborah. I'm so grateful to be here.
Fantastic, fantastic. So first, tell us about your law firm and the services you offer there.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to tell you about it. We practice business immigration primarily. That is when businesses are hiring people or people are creating their own businesses. Those are the things that we focus on. And that means H-1B visas, L visas, E-2 visas, O visas, and various types of green cards. We also help unite families, so spouses, children, parents, and we help with citizenship cases. We do not go to court. I do a lot of pro bono in that area. We can talk about that another time. But I primarily focus on business immigration.
Fantastic. And I know this is a big issue right now, business immigration, because of the just massive layoffs in the tech sector. And many of these workers, of course, are immigrants. They immigrated to the US in order to take on some of these jobs and now are being laid off. Tell us about the impact of those layoffs in terms of immigration.
Thank you so much for bringing this very timely topic up. You know, people don't necessarily look behind the headlines all the time, but the headlines over the last 6 months have been such and such company is laying off X percentage of their workforce. And, you know, that has been slowly escalating. I live in Seattle, Washington. It started in the summer and fall of 2022 with Zillow and Redfin, some of the companies here. Amazon had started to lay off people October, November, but now we're in 2023 and it's just escalating. Microsoft just announced a layoffs. Salesforce did. Google did last week. It's just the numbers keep going up. But what people don't really think about as much are the workforce that are immigrants. What happens to them? Why does it matter? Anybody who's in the United States working for a company must have a visa, and that visa is only valid if they are working. And so an employer will sponsor them, and as long as they're working, they are validly working in the United States in status. If they are not working, they are out of status. Now, in 2008 and 9, you might remember there was a similar recession with a lot of layoffs. At the time, the laws did not allow any wiggle room. The moment they were laid off, they were immediately out of status. Now, they have 60 days of grace period, meaning that they're not in status, but they can be here, wrap up their lives, or find another job. And if in 60 days they don't find another job, they must leave the country or they must file for a different type of visa, which is not very easy to figure out what would be right for them. So it's a very challenging time for a very large number of people, likely thousands and thousands.
No doubt, no doubt. And as you mentioned, among your services is uniting families. And so many of these workers who've been laid off, immigrants, have families with them, and so they will have to obviously move their entire families if they aren't able to find new employment. Is that right?
Such a good question. Absolutely. And let me just paint a picture of a typical immigrant who's waiting in the line to get a green card. They would, and when we are looking at these thousands, you can possibly look at them as categories. People who have H-1B visas, L visas. Every person on a different visa will have a different consideration of what their path will be. But a large group of these people will be on H-1B visas. And they can only be here beyond 6 years if they are in the line to get a green card. Now, it's a very long discussion to say how they got in the green card line, but know that they are in this line. And they can be in that line if a job is waiting for them at the end of this waiting period. Very complex story short, if the job goes away in the future, while they may hold that position in the line, they cannot get that green card because the job is not there. But because they are in this line, their spouses will be able to work as well. So quite often you'll find there are two income households because of being in this green card waiting path. Suddenly they can't work because the spouse's income or work permission depends on the individual who has the H-1B. And so there is a lot of stress going on in these households where they've gone from two incomes to zero. Children were born here. Maybe the children were small when they arrived. They don't know anything but America. And so now it's not just one person, it's multiple people's lives.
That's extraordinary. That is a crisis for sure. And we're here in the Raleigh-Durham area. So Google has made big investments recently. Apple is building an entire campus here, and yet they are laying off more than 10,000 people, those companies. And so there's a question of the economic impact. We don't yet know the impact on our region of those layoffs, but this is happening around the country. Have you heard anything? Have you heard anything about the potential economic impact of these layoffs and this crisis and people having to leave the country?
Well, I think things are still unfolding. The big number of layoffs had really started October, November, and they're coming into their 60-day grace period. A lot of people in October who are notified about their layoffs really have their last paycheck coming in sometime around now. So this is an ongoing event to look at and see unfold because it's going to have a ramification on the entire ecosystem. One of the things that I have always said to people is if you just look at your phone, your cell phone, the hardware, the software, the network, all of these things are being managed by skilled immigrant workers. Now, I think, and this is a prediction, we'll see what happens, these big companies still need to serve us, the consumers. How are they going to serve us? And what we saw in 2008 and 9 is that when the layoffs happened, to make sure that the customers were served, smaller companies had risen more and more and more. And they were hiring the immigrant workers and then supporting the big companies. So I predict we'll see a resurgence of that. But it also means that the people that are actually laid off need to take steps right now. 60 days is not enough. You're so stressed, you're paralyzed for 30 days, but you don't have that time. And so I have been suggesting that people start their own companies. And I have just started holding startup visa workshops for people who are laid off so they can understand that these are the range of visas they can potentially apply for. And these are the options they need to consider, whether they can stay here or not.
Now, that's fascinating and a really, really good outcome. If these people laid off were to start their own businesses, would that allow them to stay in the country or get another visa? What is that visa?
It could. You still have to use the visas that exist. So they could possibly use the H-1B visa, and it can be people who have ownership in companies. It's not easy. It's not quick. And there are lots of strategic components. And one of the things I've been trying to explain to people, the H-1B for a company in which you have ownership is no different or maybe a little bit more difficult than the Microsoft or an Amazon filing because they're very established, but it is totally possible. But when you are an employee coming out of a big company, unless you have thought about your own startup, it's not the first thing you think about. You're thinking about, I need to get another job. Now, if you think about the tech companies that have laid people off, we've heard a lot about these companies, but there are a lot of companies who have not mentioned in public that they have laid people off. But all of them, or a large portion of them, have hiring freezes. So where are these people going to get jobs from? So I'm basically stepping up saying, well, think about what you could do outside of the box. If definitely try for getting a new job, but if you can't, what are your options? And I became a proponent of a new visa category called the startup visa. And that started because in 2008 and 9, these very people said to me, I want to start my own company. Get me a visa. And there wasn't one for the modern day business procedural ways of doing things. There's a investor who puts money in you, you put sweat equity and your innovative ideas. Those were not the way businesses happened in 1990 when the laws were set. So I think a startup visa, it has its momentum right now where Congress needs to create one. But until Congress takes action, we have to use the visas that exist.
Excellent, excellent. We should mention here that you are a podcaster as well. One of your podcasts, I believe, is the Startup Visa podcast, where presumably you talk about these very issues and how to
That's
get a
correct.
visa if you're a
Yes, thank you.
startup.
In fact, I wrote a book, and it's on the second edition. I wrote a book called The Startup Visa, so that lawmakers and policymakers and anybody in the startup ecosystem, including startup founders, could learn some of the challenges and how they can craft their own cases. So the second edition just came out last year, or the year before. I can't remember. Time is a blur. But I think, if anybody listening is curious about the startup visa, I strongly recommend you get the book. It's on Amazon or anywhere else you get your books, but please leave me some stars. It's like, a politician who needs votes, authors need stars. So please consider that. But you will learn so much. And this is the moment when people need to step up. Our immigration system is broken. Sonia, Deborah, you talk about broken systems right at the top of your hour. And the system is broken not just in what you do every day. The system is broken in immigration. And it needs
Absolutely.
a huge fix.
Thank you. Thank you for that reference as well. I think that's absolutely right. I want to talk about how we got here in immigration law in just a moment. But if I have been laid off, if I'm a tech worker and an immigrant and I've been laid off and I want to start my own company, does it matter where I am? In other words, where I'm located in the country, or would I need to be in the Seattle area or the New York area to be able to use your services?
Well, that's a really great question. Thank you so much. First of all, I live and work in Seattle only. I am barred in New York and Washington State. But immigration is a federal area of law. So it doesn't really matter where you are. My clients are in the US. Sometimes they're outside the country. I've never seen them. But I know that your area is actually a booming tech area. And it quite likely will result in a lot of people who could, if with knowledge and information, could have some aha moments of their own, and hopefully, be able to do something to take immigration into their own hands. So yes, great question. I would ask people to sign up to our blog. It's watsonimmigration.law/blog, because we are putting workshop information out there. Again, we never did workshops before, but I felt compelled because so much information needs to be given out to so many people in a short amount of time. And so we're doing these workshops. I would love for people to reach out. And I just did one on Sunday. Today's Thursday. So I'm thinking about the next one because I think they need to be in a rolling way. So people can reach out to us. And of course, we do consultations and help in general.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, Tahmina, let's talk briefly about how we got here. U.S. immigration law, as you know, has a long, oftentimes ugly history. At one point you had to be white or of European ancestry only to be able to get in, and then we had the civil rights movement, and things changed. Now we've got exceptions for employment-based immigration or family-based immigration or all of these other. It's gotten to be very complicated, and as you mentioned earlier, there's still an evolution of the law. And so, just how did we get to a place where we can have a crisis where if you lose a job, you can be forced to leave the country?
Yeah, well, Sonia, your historic knowledge is spot on. Where do we even begin? Well, first of all, I want to remind people that America is a land of immigrants. I mentioned my book, The Startup Visa. I'm an immigrant too. People tune into my accent. I moved here from the United Kingdom where I was a lawyer as well. But I researched a lot for the book as well to make sure there was some historic context. And when the immigrants came from the United Kingdom because they were being persecuted, that is how America's economy just started. And I don't know these people. I just know this documentary. It's called America, the Story of Us. It was on the History Channel. It's a, several episode documentary. I loved it. I have never binge watched a documentary, but I was looking at it from an immigration perspective. It's not about immigrants at all, but I looked at it with an immigrant perspective. And it's a beautiful summary of how America became to what it is today. But what I took away from that is, the settlers came, and it was John Rolfe with the seeds of, tobacco that allowed the economy to flourish. Before that, it was all cannibalistic. And then from there, cities had started to grow. And then New York became this hub. And it became this city with tall buildings and high scrapers, tall building scrapers, because an immigrant created a cheap way to create aluminum, as Americans will say, or steel. That was Carnegie, I believe, who came from Scotland. If you think about Levi's jeans and Nordstrom and so many things in the past where immigrants really shaped us into the country that we are, but the laws really haven't kept up with the globalization of the world as it is. You're totally right. There was the Chinese Exclusion Act. We had that after the people from Southeast Asia helped us connect East Coast to West Coast with the rail tracks. Their work was done, then we had the Chinese Exclusion Act. There was always discriminatory laws until the civil rights movement came along and propelled immigration reform in the 50s. And then we didn't see any changes until the 90s, where we have the law that we work with at present. At that time, it was done so that families could be together. And you're totally right. There was there were lots of discriminatory things that went in to immigration reform before that happened, but family was the focus. But now, when you look at the world as it is with technology, you can be communicating with Timbuktu in a moment's notice. How did we get through the last 2 years? It was technology. By that same means, travel is easier. So much has happened. Our immigration laws need to keep up with the times, not the other way around. So the recession, businesses, I don't know who you're talking to, Sonia, about businesses, but businesses are struggling to get workers. How are we going to get these workers to serve our businesses? So there is a whole, systemic problem where if you try to fix the ankle bone without fixing the knee, hip, and everything else, you're still going to be left with a wonky system. And it's time that we fix the entire system.
That's fascinating history, and I really appreciate that perspective. You remind me that the 1619 Project is premiering on Hulu, I believe it is. So I recommend that everyone check that out as well. It's also a nation, as you know, of indigenous people and enslaved Africans who were, in many cases, were here before those folks at Plymouth Rock. And so the immigration and the way the country developed and that evolution of it, I think all needs a very healthy remembering. I think if we're going to evolve the immigration system in a way that's helpful for all of us. So I really appreciate that. And so let me share, Tahmina, your website on the screen for our users. And I think, as I said, we are going to suffer some of those layoff crises here locally in Raleigh-Durham, but I know this is happening across the country. And so helpful to hear that you are able to serve people no matter where they are in the country. So I just want to share your website, watsonimmigrationlaw.com, and you want to put a /blog on that to participate in the workshops and be able to find you there. Tahmina, where else can people find you online?
Oh, yes, social media. I am very active on LinkedIn, so people can connect there, and I'm always posting about the things that matter to me. I write a monthly column in Above the Law. You probably know that magazine. I love being able to share timely information, and I would love to draw people's attention to the various articles I've written over time because they're all timely for the issues. But my most recent one I'm very proud of, it's called Love is a Boomerang. And I truly believe that if there was more love in the world for self and others, we would be in a much better society. And I would love for people to read that article.
I love that title. Love is a boomerang. That should be on baseball caps and shirts and coffee cups everywhere. That's
That's such a
fantastic.
great idea. Oh my gosh. Thank you for that idea that hatched right now. And I'm a photographer in my spare time. So I've been thinking about how to put captions on my pictures. I'm going to put Love is a
There you
Boomerang.
go.
Thank
I
you.
will buy one. I will buy one. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tahmina, for joining us and sharing this wealth of knowledge. So incredible to learn about this specific subject of employment law and the tech crisis. I really appreciate your perspective. Thank you so much for
Thank,
joining us.
thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Grateful.
That is so
Wow.
fascinating. That is great information to have shared here. Fantastic. Well, Deborah, do you want to share the answer to your last quiz? And what do you have teed up
Yes.
for us next?
Yes. So the question was, in a defamation case, absolute privilege. Well, the question was, what does absolute privilege mean in a defamation case? In a defamation case, absolute privilege means that a person is immune from liability for defamatory statements in certain situations. That means that sometimes if someone is let's say they're a public figure and they're there's some truths that come out about them. They're and let me start over. There's a number of claims that you could charge against someone for defaming you. And in some situations, that person can be immune from liability for defamatory statements. For example, a police officer might be immune when they might say something in the heat of the moment in terms of something that about a suspect. So that kind of thing. It's typically absolute privilege applies to very high-ranking officials. Maybe it could be the president or governor, and so on. Okay, now that was hard to get out of. Okay, today's quiz though is the following statement an exception to the hearsay rule? The hearsay rule says basically you can't you can't you can't bring into evidence something that somebody told you secondhand. But there are some exceptions. A doctor testifies in court that an injured person that an injured patient. So the question is the following statement an exception to the hearsay rule? A doctor testifies in court that an injured patient told him she ran a red light and caused the accident that harmed her. Is that statement an exception to the hearsay rule? Can they use that as evidence in court? All right.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing the answer to that one. That's for sure. Good, good. Great to see those questions. I'm just so, as I'm reflecting on Tamina's comments there around immigration, I'm just, again, so happy to know that those kinds of services exist, that immigration lawyers are thinking about how to address the crisis in tech layoffs and just what all that means to so many millions, really, of families, right? Again, if the person who holds the visa loses a job, then that means the second earner in the household who is employed on that basis could also lose their job.
You're right.
automatically. And then you have kids in school who may have to, leave and have
Mhm.
their education disrupted at a time when kids in school for the last couple of years have been tremendously disrupted already. It's just so much
And
bottled up into that topic there.
and 60 days is so short, especially when you've had your whole life here for years. I mean, 60 days is just really no time,
It
you
is.
know.
It is. Yeah, it is terrible.
Yeah.
And I think we also have to look at the economic consequences. I read regularly in local news about the potential impact of the Google and Apple and other,
Mm.
tech investments into the area that might be disrupted now as well because they're
Wow.
laying off so many people. So
Wow.
yeah, more attention needs to be paid to these very serious issues. So really grateful to Tahmina for joining us today.
Exactly. Exactly. That's great.
That's all we have for you today. Thanks as always for joining us on Who Wrote That Up For You, and we will see you again next time.
Are you feeling beleaguered, angry, or afraid, as if things are spinning out of control and you're powerless to stop them? It's easy to just let things slide and hope they don't get worse. But they often do get worse. The thing is, you're not powerless. Our courts belong to us, and their purpose is to give power to the powerless. Don't let your grievances pile up without redressing them. You can handle this in court. Or, if someone takes you to court, you can take them to school.